Hello everyone and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story name: The Silent Carnival. The carnival arrived overnight, materializing as if by some strange magic. One day, the sprawling lot at the edge of town was an empty, windswept plain. The next, it was a dazzling maze of striped tents, blinking lights, and towering rides that spun against the backdrop of an overcast sky. No one in town had seen or heard them set up. There were no trucks, no laborers. It was simply there, waiting, its garish colors stark against the drab, gray landscape. The hand-painted signs at the entrance read, "The Silent Carnival, open at dusk." Beneath the letters, smaller text warned, "Once inside, stay until the end." Curiosity buzzed through the town. Some people dismissed it as a cheap attraction. Others whispered of strange rumors, that this wasn't the first time the carnival had appeared and that the towns it visited were never the same afterward. Still, by the time dusk arrived, nearly everyone had gathered at the entrance, drawn by an inexplicable pull. Among them was Mia, a 17-year-old girl with a restless heart and a thirst for adventure. Her younger brother, Danny, tugged at her sleeve, his face alight with excitement. "We have to go in," he said, his voice breaking through the hum of the crowd. Mia hesitated, her eyes lingering on the sign's warning. Something about it unsettled her, but she didn't want to disappoint Danny. With a resigned sigh, she nodded. The moment they stepped through the gates, the air changed. It was colder, sharper, carrying the faint scent of burnt sugar and something metallic. The lights above flickered erratically, casting strange, shifting shadows across the crowd. Despite the carnival's name, the air wasn't silent. It was filled with the faint, disjointed sounds of calliope music and laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Mia tightened her grip on Danny's hand as they walked deeper into the maze of attractions. The people around them moved as if in a trance, their faces slack with an unnatural calm. Danny tugged her toward a nearby game booth where a carny in a pinstriped vest and an unnervingly wide smile waved them over. The man's eyes were pale and milky, as if blind, but he moved with unsettling precision. "Step right up," he said, his voice deep and syrupy. "Win a prize for the young one." Mia glanced at the game, a simple setup with bottles to knock over, and hesitated. The prizes hanging from the booth were strange: tarnished silver trinkets, small jars filled with swirling black mist, and dolls that looked eerily lifelike. Before she could protest, Danny grabbed one of the balls and threw it with surprising force. It struck the bottles, and they toppled easily, though Mia could have sworn they weren't properly weighted. "We have a winner," the carny declared, clapping his hands. "Choose your prize, young man." Danny pointed at one of the jars, mesmerized by the shifting mist inside. As soon as the jar was in his hands, the laughter around them grew louder, more discordant. Mia felt a chill run down her spine. "Let's keep moving," she said, pulling Danny away. He clutched the jar tightly, his eyes fixed on the swirling contents. As they walked, Mia noticed things she hadn't before. The carnival goers were no longer moving in random directions. They seemed to be following an unseen path, their steps synchronized. The laughter and music grew fainter the farther they went, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against her ears. She tried to find an exit, but every path led them deeper into the carnival. The rides loomed higher, their metal frames twisting into unnatural shapes. The colors of the tents bled together, shifting and pulsating like living things. They passed a mirror maze, its entrance flanked by two statues of grinning jesters. Mia felt a strange compulsion to look inside, but she resisted, her grip on Danny tightening. "We need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. Danny didn't respond. He was staring at his jar, his face pale and his lips moving as if whispering to it. "Danny," she snapped, shaking his shoulder. He blinked, his eyes unfocused, and looked up at her. "But I heard it talking," he murmured. "It knows my name." Mia's stomach churned. "We're going back," she said firmly, though she had no idea how. As they wandered, the carnival seemed to shift around them, its pathways changing and bending. The attractions became more grotesque. A carousel spun slowly, its horses replaced by pale, writhing figures that reached out to the passing crowd. A clown with a cracked porcelain mask sat on a bench, its head swiveling unnaturally to follow them as they passed. Mia's heart raced, and she fought the urge to scream. "We have to stay calm," she whispered, more to herself than to Danny. "It's just a carnival. It's just a carnival." They reached a large tent near the center of the grounds, its entrance flapping in the cold wind. A sign above read, "The Final Performance." The crowd moved toward it, their steps mechanical, their faces blank. Mia tried to pull Danny away, but he resisted, his eyes drawn to the tent. "We have to go inside," he said, his voice distant. "No, we don't," Mia hissed, panic creeping into her voice. But Danny's grip on her hand was iron tight, and before she could stop him, they were swept inside with the crowd. The interior of the tent was impossibly large, its ceiling stretching higher than any structure Mia had ever seen. Rows of seats encircled a central stage, which was shrouded in darkness. The crowd moved silently to their seats, and Mia had no choice but to follow, her heart pounding in her chest. The jar in Danny's hands began to glow faintly, the mist inside swirling faster. "What's happening?" she whispered, but Danny didn't answer. He was staring at the stage, his expression vacant. The lights dimmed, and the tent fell into complete silence. Then, with a deafening crack, the stage was illuminated, revealing a figure standing at its center. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and its face obscured by a mask that seemed to shift and change. It raised its arms, and the crowd gasped in unison. The figure began to speak, its voice a deep, guttural rasp that seemed to bypass Mia's ears and burrow directly into her mind. "Welcome," it said, its words reverberating through the tent. "You have entered the Silent Carnival. And now, you belong to us." Mia's vision blurred as the voice grew louder, filling her head with images she couldn't comprehend, endless corridors, twisted faces, and an overwhelming sense of despair. She clutched her head, trying to block it out, but it was useless. Around her, the crowd rose to their feet, their bodies stiff and jerking as if controlled by invisible strings. Danny stood too, the jar in his hands glowing brighter and brighter until it shattered, releasing a thick, black mist that swirled around him. He looked at Mia, his eyes wide with terror. "Help me," he whispered before the mist consumed him. Mia screamed, reaching for her brother, but the crowd closed in around her, their faces twisted into grotesque smiles. The figure on the stage laughed, a sound that shook the very ground beneath her. "The carnival never ends," it said. "And neither will you." The last thing Mia saw before darkness enveloped her was Danny's face, staring at her from within the mist, his eyes empty and lifeless. The lights dimmed even further, until the tent was engulfed in near total darkness. Mia could feel her heartbeat reverberating in her chest, the silence surrounding her so intense that it pressed down like a physical weight. Then, with a sudden, deafening crack, the lights blazed to life, casting an eerie, sickly glow over the stage. The figure at the center of the stage seemed to stretch and distort as the light caught it from different angles. Its body was unnaturally tall, its limbs so elongated that they looked like they could reach across the entire tent with a single swipe. The skin was ashen, pale, and stretched tight over bones that seemed far too sharp and angular to belong to any human. Its face was obscured by a mask, a featureless, smooth expanse of porcelain that seemed to ripple, changing shape before Mia's eyes. The mask contorted like liquid, its features shifting in and out of existence. One moment, it was a smiling face, its mouth stretching impossibly wide, and the next, it was a grotesque, screaming mouth with hollow eyes, staring into her very soul. The figure raised its arms slowly, its fingers unnaturally long, each one ending in sharp, claw-like nails that scraped against the air. Mia felt a chill creep into her bones as the crowd around her exhaled in unison, an audible gasp that sounded more like a collective breath held for far too long. "Welcome," the figure rasped, its voice sending a shiver down Mia's spine. It didn't come from its mouth. Rather, it felt like the sound was born deep within her skull, reverberating in her mind, as though the very words were whispered into her consciousness from every direction. "You have entered the Silent Carnival. And now, you belong to us." Each syllable felt like a weight, a burden pressing down on her chest until she struggled to breathe. The crowd remained frozen, their movements slow and deliberate, as though they were no longer themselves. Their eyes were glazed, their expressions vacant, their faces twisted in grotesque, eerie smiles that never wavered. Mia wanted to scream, but her throat tightened as though the air around her had thickened, leaving her breathless. She felt dizzy, as though the world around her was warping, pulling her in multiple directions at once. The figure on stage spread its arms wide, and with an unnatural swiftness, its long, bony fingers reached into the air above it. The lights flickered again, casting sharp shadows that danced unnervingly across the walls of the tent. The air turned colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that Mia's breath formed thick, freezing clouds in front of her. But the crowd didn't shiver, didn't react at all. They simply stood, staring, their eyes unblinking, their smiles stretched too wide to be real. Mia felt as though she were standing in the midst of a nightmare, trapped in a world where nothing made sense and everything was wrong. The figure continued speaking, its voice now a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the floor beneath her feet. "You have come to the end of your journey," it said, its words dripping with something darker than malice, "and now you will see the truth. The carnival is eternal. And so, too, are you." Mia's vision blurred as the voice filled her mind, overwhelming her senses. Images began to flash before her eyes, fleeting, disjointed snapshots that made no sense but caused her pulse to spike. She saw endless corridors lined with mirrors, each reflection distorted, twisting into shapes that were wrong, unnatural. Faces flickered in the mirrors, their eyes hollow and their expressions twisted with terror. The laughter that had once been faint was now deafening, rising in volume until it felt like it was crawling beneath her skin, wrapping around her thoughts, suffocating her. Mia's body stiffened as her mind was bombarded with strange, nightmarish images, of her own face contorted in agony, of Danny's wide, unblinking eyes staring back at her from inside the swirling black mist. She felt like she was being pulled in every direction, her limbs becoming heavy, her body sinking into the cold, damp floor beneath her. The air seemed to thicken, becoming a tangible force pressing against her chest, her heart pounding wildly in her chest as the figure's voice became a constant, oppressive hum inside her skull. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't escape him. And then, Danny's voice broke through the cacophony. "Mia!" His voice was faint, as though it came from the farthest reaches of her mind. "Mia, help me." She snapped her head toward him, her pulse racing, but the world around her had become a blur, an ever-shifting haze of lights and shadows. Danny was standing before her, but his form wasn't right. His body was twisted, his features stretched and elongated, his eyes wide and empty, the pupils swallowed by a black void. The jar, the one he had won earlier, was still in his hands, but now the mist inside it had thickened, swirling violently, almost as though something were trying to escape. Mia reached for him, her hands trembling, but as her fingers brushed his arm, he jerked away violently. The mist from the jar seemed to leap into the air, and with it, Danny's form began to distort. His body contorted unnaturally, his limbs twisting in impossible angles. His face stretched into an expression that was both familiar and wrong, a mask of fear and pain frozen forever. Mia screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the unnatural, otherworldly music that began to play in the background, a mournful, discordant tune that sent waves of nausea through her stomach. "Don't look away," the figure on stage whispered, its voice growing louder, more demanding. "You're part of it now. There's no escaping." Danny's body collapsed into a heap of twisted limbs and jagged angles, his form breaking apart into dark, writhing shadows that stretched and coiled like serpents. The air around Mia grew thick, stifling, as the laughter of the crowd reached a deafening crescendo. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her body refused to obey. She felt as if the very ground beneath her had become alive, its surface shifting and wriggling like it had a pulse of its own. And then, as the laughter reached its peak, everything stopped. The lights flickered one final time and went out, plunging the tent into total darkness. Mia's breath came in shallow, frantic gasps, her heart pounding in her ears. She couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, but she felt it, the cold fingers of something brushing against her skin, the weight of eyes that watched her from the shadows. She wanted to move, wanted to escape, but her body was frozen, rooted to the spot, trapped in the silent, suffocating void. Suddenly, a sharp crack sounded from above, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the ground. The tent around her trembled, the air thickening with an almost palpable sense of dread. Someone was moving in the darkness, coming closer. A whisper grazed her ear, a voice so low and broken that it barely registered, but it was enough to make her blood run cold. "Mia." The voice was Danny's, but it wasn't. It was distorted, twisted, as though it had been stretched and shredded beyond recognition. "Mia, you never left." A cold hand gripped her shoulder, its touch icy, unfeeling. Mia jerked, her heart leaping into her throat. She spun around, her pulse racing, but there was nothing. The tent was empty, silent, save for her ragged breathing. But as she turned to flee, the figure on stage appeared again, its mask now completely featureless, a blank slate staring back at her with hollow, endless eyes. And in that moment, Mia realized the truth. She had never been meant to leave. The carnival would never let her go.
If you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have a tale of your own or a legend you'd like us to explore? Let us know. You might just hear it next. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Because here, the darkness is always waiting just for you.